When the entire garage fell silent after she touched one wire, they realized the woman they'd been mocking wasn't who they thought she was. What happened next left grown mechanics speechless and changed everything they believed about who deserves respect. In the bustling downtown auto repair garage, the scent of motor oil mixed with the sharp bite of welding sparks. The concrete floors echoed with the clang of wrenches against metal and the hiss of hydraulic lifts. Fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across rows of disabled vehicles, each one representing someone's transportation crisis and financial burden. Michelle walked quietly through the maze of broken-down cars, her cleaning supplies cart rolling softly behind her. For 3 years, she'd moved through this testosterone-filled world like a ghost, wiping down workbenches, emptying trash bins, and sweeping the debris of other people's mechanical victories. The mechanics barely acknowledged her presence, their eyes sliding past her navy blue uniform as if she were just another piece of equipment. "Hey, can you grab me a coffee?" barked Tony, the head mechanic, not bothering to look up from the engine he was cursing at. His grease-stained overalls and 20 years of experience gave him an air of unquestionable authority in this domain of carburetors and transmissions. Michelle nodded silently, accustomed to being treated like an invisible service provider rather than a human being with thoughts and feelings. But as she moved toward the break room, she caught fragments of heated conversation from the garage's most experienced mechanics. "This hybrid system is completely fried," muttered Jake, wiping sweat from his forehead. "The regenerative braking isn't communicating with the battery management system." "I've been working on hybrids for 5 years," added Carlos, frustration evident in his voice. "Never seen anything like this. The diagnostic computer is throwing codes I can't even interpret." Michelle slowed her pace, her ears attuning to the technical language that most people would dismiss as mechanical jargon. But these weren't foreign words to her. They were familiar friends she hadn't spoken to in years, terminology that once flowed from her lips as naturally as breathing. "The owner's been waiting 3 weeks," Tony said, his voice carrying the weight of professional embarrassment. "Corporates, sending their best specialist tomorrow. But if we can't figure this out, we're looking at a complete system replacement." $12,000. Michelle found herself gravitating toward the hybrid vehicle, a sleek 2023 Toyota Camry hybrid that sat defeated in Bay 3. The hood was propped open like a patient on an operating table, revealing a complex network of electric cables, traditional engine components, and sophisticated computer modules that most mechanics still found intimidating. As she pretended to clean a nearby workbench, Michelle's trained eyes automatically began analyzing the problem. The way the high-voltage cables were positioned, the unusual wear pattern on the brake components, the subtle discoloration around the battery cooling system, details that spoke to her like a language she'd been forced to forget, but could never truly lose. "Maybe it's the thermal management system," she whispered to herself, the words escaping before she could stop them. The garage suddenly felt quieter, as if the very air had shifted. Tony looked up sharply, his weathered face creased with irritation. Did the cleaning lady just try to diagnose a hybrid drive system? His voice carried a mixture of amusement and disbelief that made the other mechanics chuckle. Michelle's cheeks burned with embarrassment, but something deeper stirred in her chest. It wasn't just humiliation. It was the painful recognition of expertise being dismissed because of assumptions about who she was supposed to be. "I was just," she began softly. "You were just what? Thinking you understand automotive engineering?" Jake's laughter was sharp and cutting. "Stick to mopping floors, sweetheart. Leave the thinking to the professionals." The other mechanics joined, in the cruel laughter, their voices echoing off the concrete walls like a chorus of dismissal. But Michelle didn't cry. Instead, she gripped her cleaning cloth tighter and felt something awakening inside her that had been dormant for far too long. Because sometimes, the most dangerous person in the room is the one everybody underestimates. Before we dive deeper into Michelle's incredible story, I need your help to keep bringing you these powerful stories of overlooked heroes. If you believe that everyone deserves respect regardless of their job title, hit that subscribe button right now. We're building a community of people who understand that wisdom and expertise can come from the most unexpected places. Rate this story from 0 to 10 in the comments. How invested are you in finding out what Michelle's background really is? And here's what I want you to think about while watching. How many times have you made assumptions about someone's capabilities based on their appearance or job? Share your thoughts in the comments because these conversations matter. Trust me, Michelle's story is about to take a turn that will leave you questioning everything you think you know about hidden talent. Michelle Washington had worked at Downtown's auto repair for exactly 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days. Not that anyone had bothered to acknowledge her work anniversary, or even remember her last name. To them, she was simply the cleaning lady, a quiet, unremarkable woman who showed up at 6 a.m. sharp, worked her 8-hour shift in near silence, and disappeared back into whatever life existed beyond the garage walls. The prestigious repair shop served the city's wealthiest clients, their gleaming BMWs, Mercedes, and Teslas, a stark contrast to Michelle's humble role. She moved through this world of luxury vehicles like a shadow, her presence acknowledged only when someone needed trash emptied or a spill cleaned up. The mechanics walked past her as if she were invisible, their conversations flowing around her like water around a stone. But Michelle watched. She always watched. On that particular Tuesday morning, the autumn air carried the crisp promise of winter through the open garage doors. Michelle arrived to find the shop buzzing with unusual tension. The hybrid Toyota that had been their nemesis for weeks sat in Bay 3, surrounded by diagnostic equipment worth more than most people's annual salaries. "Corporate's breathing down our necks," she heard Tony explaining to the morning shift. "If we can't crack this thing today, they're sending their master technician from headquarters. That's not exactly going to look good on our quarterly review." Michelle continued her routine, methodically wiping down workbenches and organizing tools, but her eyes kept drifting to the troubled hybrid. As she worked, she absorbed every detail of their troubleshooting process, mentally cataloging each test they performed and each frustrated conclusion they reached. Around 10 a.m., she overheard Jake on the phone with Toyota's technical support line. His end of the conversation painted a picture of complete bewilderment. "Yeah, I've checked all the standard protocol. No, the battery voltage looks normal. The regenerative braking system shows no obvious faults. I know, but the car just won't start, and the diagnostic codes don't match anything in our database." As Michelle emptied the trash near Bay 3, she noticed something the mechanics had missed. The high-voltage disconnect switch had a barely perceptible hairline crack in its housing. It was the kind of detail that required not just experience, but a deep understanding of hybrid electrical systems, knowledge that went far beyond standard automotive training. She paused, her heart racing as technical knowledge she hadn't accessed in years suddenly flooded back. The thermal management system, the battery cooling circuits, the complex interaction between electric and gasoline power, it was all still there, locked away in her memory like treasured books in a forgotten library. "The inverter coolant pump," she whispered, so quietly that no one could hear. "It's not the obvious systems, it's the cooling circuit." Her hands trembled slightly as she continued cleaning, but her mind was racing through diagnostic trees she hadn't navigated since her previous life. The symptoms these experienced mechanics couldn't solve were actually textbook indicators of a very specific failure mode, one that required understanding the intricate relationship between thermal management and electrical system protection. That afternoon, as the mechanics took their lunch break, Michelle found herself alone with the hybrid. Almost without conscious thought, she approached the vehicle, her cleaning supplies forgotten. She leaned over the engine bay, her eyes scanning. The complex hybrid drivetrain with the familiarity of someone reading a beloved book. There it was. The inverter coolant pump's electrical connector showed the telltale signs of thermal damage. Microscopic corrosion that would cause intermittent connection failures. The pump would work sometimes, fail others, causing the entire hybrid system to shut down as a protective measure. It was elegant in its complexity and simple in its solution. "If I could just test the continuity on that circuit," she murmured, then caught herself. She was a cleaning lady. She had no business touching expensive diagnostic equipment or making technical assessments. But as she turned away, she heard Tony's voice carrying from the break room. "If we don't figure this out by tomorrow, Henderson says we might be looking at losing the Toyota warranty contract. 20 years I've been here, and I've never seen anything like this." Michelle's chest tightened. 20 years of experience, and they were stumped by a problem she'd solved in her mind within hours. The irony was almost painful. She had the knowledge to save their contracts, their reputation, maybe even their jobs, but she was trapped in a role that made her expertise invisible. That evening, as she prepared to clock out, Michelle made a decision that would change everything. She wouldn't just walk away from this problem. She couldn't. Because sometimes, doing the right thing matters more than staying invisible. In her small apartment that night, Michelle sat with a worn leather portfolio she hadn't opened in 3 years. On the cover, embossed in fading gold letters, were the words "Automotive Systems Engineer." Inside, certificates and technical documentation told the story of a brilliant career that had been sacrificed for love, family, and circumstances beyond her control. Tomorrow, she decided, the garage would finally meet the real Michelle Washington. The next morning arrived with an unusual electricity in the air at Downtown Auto Repair. Word had spread through the automotive community about the shop's mysterious hybrid problem, and several mechanics from competing garages had stopped by to witness the spectacle of a dozen experienced professionals being defeated by a single Toyota Camry. Michelle arrived at her usual 6 a.m., but instead of heading straight to her cleaning cart, she found herself drawn once again to Bay 3. The hybrid sat there like a mechanical sphinx, guarding its secrets behind layers of complex technology that had humbled some of the region's most experienced technicians. "Corporate's sending Jenkins," she overheard Carlos telling the morning crew. "The guy who wrote half the hybrid training manuals. If he can't figure it out, we're officially in uncharted territory." Michelle felt her pulse quicken. She knew Jenkins by reputation, a brilliant engineer whose diagnostic abilities were legendary in automotive circles. But she also knew that even legends could miss the subtle clues that experience with specific failure modes provided. As the morning progressed, the tension in the garage became palpable. Every mechanic had taken a turn with the hybrid, running through increasingly complex diagnostic procedures. The car's computer systems were interrogated with equipment worth more than most people's homes, yet the vehicle remained stubbornly inoperative. Around 10 a.m., Michelle noticed Jake crouched beside the hybrid, his face flushed with frustration as he spoke into his headset. "No, the high-voltage battery shows full charge. Yes, I've checked the contactors. The inverter temperatures are all within normal ranges." She moved closer with her cleaning supplies, positioning herself to observe his diagnostic process. That's when she saw it again. The almost imperceptible crack in the high-voltage disconnect switch housing. But more importantly, she noticed something else. The way the inverter coolant lines were positioned suggested someone had recently worked on the cooling system without properly understanding the hybrid-specific torque specifications. The connection was loose, just slightly, but enough to cause intermittent thermal protection faults that would shut down the entire drivetrain. It was the kind of mistake that could happen to any mechanic unfamiliar with the precise requirements of hybrid cooling systems. "Horrid thermal protection circuit," she whispered, then immediately looked around to ensure no one had heard her. But Jake had heard. He turned sharply, his eyes narrowing with irritation. "Excuse me?" Michelle's heart hammered against her ribs. I was just... You were just... what? Thinking you know something about automotive thermal management?" His voice carried an edge of disbelief mixed with condescension. "This is a $40,000 hybrid vehicle, not a household appliance." Several other mechanics had stopped their work to listen, creating an audience Michelle definitely didn't want. Tony approached from across the garage, his expression suggesting he was less than pleased with the interruption. "Is there a problem here?" Tony asked, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to maintaining order in his domain. Jake gestured toward Michelle with barely concealed contempt. "The cleaning lady thinks she's diagnosed our hybrid problem." The garage fell silent, except for the distant hum of diagnostic equipment and the soft jazz playing from someone's radio. Michelle felt the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes, all carrying the same message. "Know your place." "Look," Tony said, his tone attempting diplomacy, but failing to hide his impatience. "We appreciate your interest in the work, but this requires years of specialized training. Maybe focus on what you do best, okay?" The dismissal stung, but what hurt worse was the assumption that she couldn't possibly understand the complex systems they were struggling with. Michelle nodded silently, but as she turned away, something inside her shifted. The quiet acceptance that had characterized her 3 years at the garage began to crack, like ice under pressure. "The inverter coolant pump electrical connector is loose," she said softly, her voice barely audible above the ambient noise. This time, the silence was absolute. Even the radio seemed to quiet, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Tony's face shifted through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally, a mixture of amusement and annoyance. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" Michelle's hands were shaking, but her voice grew steadier. "The inverter coolant pump, the electrical connector. It's not making proper contact because the cooling lines weren't torqued to hybrid specifications when someone worked on it last month." The mechanics exchanged glances that ranged from bewildered to openly mocking. Carlos let out a short laugh. "She's talking about torque specifications on hybrid cooling systems," he said to no one in particular. "This is rich." But Jake's expression had shifted to something else entirely. He was staring at Michelle with newfound focus, as if seeing her for the first time. "How do you know when someone worked on the cooling system?" he asked slowly. Michelle realized she'd said too much, revealed too much knowledge, but there was no backing down now. "The coolant lines show recent tool marks," she said quietly, "and the thermal paste on the inverter housing has been disturbed. Someone replaced the coolant pump recently, but didn't follow hybrid-specific procedures." The garage was so quiet that the sound of a wrench dropping in the distance echoed like a gunshot. Tony's face had gone from amusement to something approaching concern. "Where exactly," he said slowly, "does a cleaning lady learn about inverter thermal paste?" Michelle looked at the faces surrounding her. Skeptical, condescending, but for the first time in 3 years, actually paying attention to her words. She realized she stood at a crossroads. She could retreat back to invisibility, or she could step into the light and face whatever consequences followed. She chose the light. That evening, in her modest one-bedroom apartment across town, Michelle sat at her small kitchen table with the leather portfolio she hadn't touched in 3 years. The apartment was quiet, except for the distant hum of traffic and the gentle tick of the wall clock that had belonged to her grandmother. On the table beside the portfolio sat a framed photograph that told a story of sacrifice, love, and impossible choices. In the photograph, a younger Michelle stood beside a gleaming Mercedes test vehicle, wearing a crisp white lab coat with Senior Petit-Patre, automotive systems engineer, embroidered across the chest. Her smile was confident, her posture professional, and her eyes bright with the passion of someone living their dream. Behind her, the Mercedes-Benz advanced engineering facility stretched into the distance, representing one of the automotive industry's most prestigious research and development centers. Michelle opened the portfolio with trembling fingers. The pages were full of documentation that read like a roadmap through automotive excellence. Master's degree in electrical engineering from MIT, specialized certification in hybrid and electric vehicle systems, patents for 3 different battery management innovations, and commendation letters from some of the industry's most respected names. The last document in the portfolio was dated exactly 3 years and 4 months ago. Her resignation letter from Mercedes-Benz Advanced Engineering. Due to unforeseen family circumstances, I must respectfully tender my resignation from my position as Senior Automotive Systems Engineer, effective immediately. While this decision brings me considerable professional regret, family obligations must take precedence over career considerations. Michelle traced the formal language with her finger, remembering the weight of those words and the impossible situation that had forced her to write them. Her younger brother Marcus had been just 19 when the accident happened, a motorcycle crash that left him paralyzed from the waist down and facing years of intensive rehabilitation. With their parents deceased and no other family to provide support, Michelle faced a choice that would define the rest of her life. She could maintain her prestigious position at Mercedes, with its demanding travel schedule and 60-hour work weeks, or she could sacrifice her career to provide the constant care and emotional support her brother desperately needed. The decision, when framed that way, wasn't really a decision at all. For 2 years, Michelle had devoted herself entirely to Marcus's recovery. She'd learned to navigate insurance systems, coordinate with medical specialists, and provide the emotional anchor. Her brother needed to rebuild his shattered confidence. The engineering degrees and automotive expertise that had once defined her identity were carefully folded away, stored like precious documents in a safety deposit box. When Marcus finally achieved enough independence to live in an assisted living facility, Michelle found herself facing a different kind of challenge. 3 years away from the rapidly evolving automotive industry felt like a lifetime. Electric vehicle technology had advanced exponentially, new diagnostic protocols had been established, and her network of professional contacts had moved on to new positions and projects. The prestigious engineering positions that had once been easily within her reach now seemed impossibly distant. Age discrimination, gender bias, and the assumption that her career gap represented a lack of commitment created barriers she hadn't anticipated. Interview after interview ended with polite rejections and vague promises to keep your resume on file. The cleaning position at Downtown Auto Repair hadn't been her first choice, or even her 10th, but it offered something she desperately needed: steady income, health insurance, and the opportunity to be around the automotive technology she still loved, even if she couldn't actively participate in it. For 3 years, she'd convinced herself that this arrangement was temporary. She'd told herself that being around vehicles and mechanics was better than being completely disconnected from the automotive world. But gradually, the temporary solution had become her reality, and the brilliant engineer had disappeared behind the invisible uniform of the cleaning lady. The photograph seemed to mock her current situation, the confident professional she'd been versus the dismissed and overlooked woman she'd become. But as Michelle studied her younger self, she realized something important. The knowledge, the expertise, the passion that had made her a respected engineer hadn't disappeared. They'd been dormant, waiting for the right moment to re-emerge. Marcus called every Sunday, and their conversations always included his gentle encouragement for her to return to engineering. "You saved my life, Michelle," he'd said just weeks ago. "But you don't have to sacrifice your dreams forever. I'm okay now. I'm proud of who I am, and I want you to be proud of who you are, too." Michelle closed the portfolio and looked at her reflection in the apartment's window. Tomorrow, she would walk into downtown auto repair not as the invisible cleaning lady, but as someone ready to reclaim her identity. The hybrid Toyota in Bay 3 wasn't just a mechanical problem, it was an opportunity to bridge the gap between who she'd been forced to become and who she truly was. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to Marcus's number. When he answered, his voice carried the warmth that had sustained her through the most difficult years of her life. "I think," Michelle said softly, "it's time for me to stop hiding." The garage was still dark when Michelle arrived at 4:30 a.m., 2 hours before her regular shift. The security system recognized her badge, granting access to the quiet sanctuary of downtown auto repair. In the pre-dawn stillness, the disabled hybrid in Bay 3 looked less like a mechanical challenge and more like a puzzle waiting to be solved by someone who truly understood its language. Michelle had spent the previous evening reviewing hybrid diagnostic procedures on her laptop, refreshing knowledge that felt both foreign and familiar after 3 years of dormancy. But more importantly, she'd made a decision that would either validate her expertise or permanently damage her quiet existence at the garage. She approached the Toyota with the confidence of someone who belonged there, her movements purposeful and precise. From her backpack, she withdrew a small toolkit she'd assembled from her own personal collection. Precision instruments that most mechanics would recognize as professional-grade equipment, far beyond what a cleaning person would typically own. The garage's diagnostic computer sat silent on its wheeled cart beside the vehicle. Michelle hesitated for just a moment, knowing that accessing the system would leave digital fingerprints of her presence. But the hybrid's problem called to her like a mystery that demanded resolution. She powered up the diagnostic interface and connected to the vehicle's computer systems. The screen filled with data that would overwhelm most people, but to Michelle, it was like reading a familiar book. Sensor readings, electrical values, system statuses, all painting a picture of a complex machine in distress. Working methodically, she traced the inverter cooling circuit's electrical pathway. The diagnostic computer showed normal operation, but Michelle knew that intermittent failures often hid between the gaps of standard testing protocols. She needed to simulate the exact conditions that would reveal the loose connection she'd identified. Using her own multimeter, she checked continuity across the inverter coolant pump's electrical connector, while gently manipulating the cooling lines. There, a voltage drop of 0.3 volts when the lines were positioned at a specific angle. It was subtle enough to escape standard diagnostics, but significant enough to trigger the hybrid system's thermal protection protocols. The repair itself required careful attention to hybrid-specific procedures. Michelle powered down the high-voltage system using the proper safety protocols, then carefully removed the cooling line assembly. The electrical connector showed exactly what she'd predicted: recent installation with insufficient attention to the precise torque specifications required for hybrid systems. She cleaned the connector terminals with electrical contact cleaner, applied the appropriate dielectric grease, and reassembled the connection using the exact torque values specified in the hybrid service manual. The cooling lines were repositioned to eliminate any stress on the electrical components, and the system was methodically brought back online. Michelle held her breath as she initiated the hybrid startup sequence. The diagnostic computer cycled. Through its system checks, each green indicator representing validation of her analysis. The electric motor engaged smoothly, the gasoline engine started without hesitation, and the regenerative braking system performed its calibration routine flawlessly. The repair had taken exactly 47 minutes. She documented everything meticulously, creating a detailed service report that explained not just what had been fixed, but why the failure had occurred and how to prevent similar problems in the future. The report included diagnostic screenshots, voltage measurements, and photographs of the corroded connector that had caused 3 weeks of frustration for the shop's entire staff. As she prepared to leave, Michelle realized she was no longer the same person who had arrived in the darkness. The confidence that had defined her engineering career had returned, not as arrogance, but as quiet certainty in her abilities. She was no longer hiding from her expertise. She was reclaiming it. She left the service report on Tony's desk, weighted down with the shop's coffee mug so it wouldn't be overlooked. On top of the technical documentation, she placed a simple business card she'd printed the night before. Michelle Washington, Automotive Systems Engineer, available for consultation. By 6 a.m., Michelle was back in her cleaning uniform, following her regular routine as if nothing unusual had occurred. But everything had changed. The hybrid sat quietly in Bay 3, its mysterious ailment completely resolved, waiting for the morning crew to discover what had happened during the night. As she wiped down workbenches and organized tools. Michelle felt the weight of anticipation. In a few hours, Tony would discover the repaired vehicle and the service report that would force him to confront everything he thought he knew about the quiet woman who emptied his trash cans. The morning sun began filtering through the garages, windows casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Michelle continued her cleaning routine, but her mind was already preparing for the conversation that would inevitably follow. For the first time in 3 years, she was ready to be seen, not as the invisible cleaning lady, but as the accomplished engineer she had always been. The hybrid's soft electric hum seemed to whisper its approval as the garage prepared to wake up to a very different reality. Tony arrived at the shop at 7:15 a.m. with the resigned expression of someone expecting another day of professional embarrassment. The Toyota corporate specialist was scheduled to arrive at noon, and Tony had already mentally prepared for the humiliation of watching an outsider solve a problem that had stumped his entire crew for 3 weeks. But as he approached Bay 3, something was fundamentally different. The hybrid sat quietly with its hood closed, and the diagnostic computer displayed a series of green status indicators that Tony hadn't seen in weeks. His steps slowed as confusion replaced resignation. "Carlos!" he called across the garage. "Did you work on the hybrid last night?" Carlos looked up from his morning coffee, shaking his head. "Wouldn't touch that thing after hours." "Why?" Tony stared at the diagnostic display, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Every system showed normal operation. The regenerative braking that had been completely non-functional now displayed perfect parameters. The battery management system that had been throwing incomprehensible error codes now showed flawless communication with all subsystems. On his desk, weighted down by the shop's coffee mug, sat a stack of papers that he definitely hadn't left there the night before. The top sheet was a business card with elegant, professional lettering. Michelle Washington, automotive systems engineer. Tony picked up the card with trembling fingers, his mind racing to connect the name with the quiet woman who had emptied his trash for 3 years. Beneath the business card was a comprehensive service report that made his 20 years of automotive experience feel suddenly inadequate. The document was extraordinary in its technical precision. Detailed diagnostic screenshots showed voltage, measurements taken at specific points in the hybrid cooling circuit. High-resolution photographs documented the corroded electrical connector that had been the root cause of their weeks of frustration. The repair procedure was outlined with the kind of methodical expertise that Tony recognized as far beyond standard automotive training. "Jake, Carlos, get over here. Now!" The morning crew gathered around Tony's desk as he held up the service report with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "Someone fixed the hybrid last night," Tony announced, "and whoever did it knows more about these systems than all of us combined." Jake scanned the technical documentation over Tony's shoulder. "This is graduate-level automotive engineering. Look at these diagnostic procedures. They're using testing protocols I've never even heard of." The garage fell silent as the implications sank in. Someone with extraordinary expertise had been among them all along, someone they'd dismissed and overlooked for 3 years. Carlos was the first to voice what everyone was thinking. Michelle Washington, the cleaning lady. At that moment, Michelle walked through the garage entrance, exactly on time for her 7:30 shift. She moved with the same quiet efficiency they'd observed for years, but somehow everything about her seemed different. The navy blue uniform looked less like a disguise and more like a temporary costume that no longer fit properly. "Michelle," Tony called out, his voice carrying an uncertainty that was foreign to his usual commanding tone. "Could you come over here for a minute?" She approached slowly, her expression calm but alert. The leather portfolio she'd carried that morning was tucked discreetly under her arm, and for the first time in 3 years, she made direct eye contact with each of the mechanics who had dismissed her expertise just yesterday. "Did you?" Tony began, then stopped, struggling with the impossibility of what he was asking. "Did you fix the hybrid?" Michelle set her portfolio on the workbench and opened it with deliberate precision. Inside, her engineering credentials were displayed with the same meticulous organization that had characterized the service report. MIT diploma, Mercedes-Benz commendations, hybrid systems certifications, and patent documentation that made several mechanics whistle in recognition. "My name is Michelle Washington," she said quietly, her voice carrying a dignity that transformed the entire dynamic of the garage. "I hold a master's degree in electrical engineering with specialized certification in hybrid and electric vehicle systems. For 7 years, I was a senior automotive systems engineer at Mercedes-Benz Advanced Engineering, where I led development teams for next-generation powertrain technologies." The silence was profound. Tony stared at the credentials spread before him, his mind struggling to reconcile the accomplished professional described in these documents with the woman he'd treated as invisible for 3 years. The inverter coolant pump electrical connector was compromised due to improper installation procedures, Michelle continued, her technical language now carrying the authority of genuine expertise. The intermittent connection failure was triggering thermal protection protocols throughout the hybrid system. The repair required adherence to manufacturer-specific torque specifications and electrical contact procedures. Jake's face had gone pale. "You're telling us that for 3 years, we've had a Mercedes-Benz engineer emptying our trash?" Michelle's expression remained composed, but there was steel in her voice when she replied, "You've had a Mercedes-Benz engineer asking to help with technical problems and being told to stick to mopping floors." The weight of their dismissive treatment over the past 3 years settled over the garage like a heavy blanket. Every condescending comment, every assumption about her capabilities, every time they'd treated her as invisible, it all took on a new and uncomfortable significance. Tony cleared his throat, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Michelle, I think we need to talk." The news spread through the automotive community faster than wildfire. By noon, word had reached every repair shop, dealership, and technical training center within 50 miles. Downtown Auto Repair's cleaning lady was actually a former Mercedes-Benz senior engineer who had single-handedly solved their most challenging diagnostic problem. Michelle walked into the garage that morning to find something unprecedented: respect. The mechanics who had dismissed her for 3 years now nodded respectfully as she passed, their eyes reflecting a mixture of embarrassment, admiration, and genuine curiosity about the remarkable woman they'd overlooked. But the transformation wasn't just about recognition. Tony had spent the previous evening on phone calls that would reshape Michelle's future entirely. "Michelle," Tony called out as she approached her usual workstation, "forget the cleaning supplies. We need to talk business." In Tony's small office, the conversation that followed would become legendary in automotive repair circles. Tony offered her the position of lead diagnostic specialist at double her current salary, with the authority to oversee complex repairs and train other mechanics in advanced hybrid technologies. "But that's not all," Tony continued, his voice carrying genuine excitement. "I've been talking to Mercedes, Toyota, and Honda corporate divisions. They're all interested in hiring you as a consulting engineer for their certified repair networks." Michelle listened quietly, but her response surprised everyone. "I appreciate the offers, Tony, but I have conditions." She explained that her years of being invisible had taught her something valuable about the automotive industry's blind spots. Too many talented people were overlooked because they didn't fit traditional expectations. Too many repair shops struggled with advanced technologies because they focused on credentials rather than actual knowledge. "I'll accept the lead diagnostic position," Michelle said, "but I want to establish a technical mentorship program. I want to train mechanics in hybrid technologies, regardless of their formal education. And I want us to actively recruit talent from unconventional backgrounds." Within a week, the Toyota corporate specialist who had been scheduled to solve their hybrid problem arrived to find the vehicle running perfectly. Instead of conducting a repair, he spent 3 hours learning from Michelle about diagnostic techniques that weren't taught in standard technical training programs. "You've identified failure modes we haven't documented," he admitted. "Would you be interested in consulting on our advanced diagnostic protocol development?" The automotive industry's recognition came swiftly and substantially. Michelle received job offers from 3 major manufacturers, 2 opportunities to lead, technical training programs, and an invitation to speak at the National Automotive Technology Conference. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. 3 weeks after the hybrid repair, a young Latina woman named Sophia approached Michelle in the garage. Sophia worked part-time cleaning offices at night while studying automotive technology during the day, and she'd heard about Michelle's story through the community network that connects working people across industries. "I've been studying hybrid systems for 2 years," Sophia said quietly. "But the instructors act like I can't understand the technical concepts because I'm not like the other students." Michelle saw herself reflected in Sophia's frustration and determination. That afternoon, she began what would become the most important work of her career: mentoring talented individuals who were overlooked by traditional automotive education systems. The mentorship program grew rapidly. Michelle worked with military, veterans transitioning to civilian careers, immigrants with engineering backgrounds who couldn't get recognition for their foreign credentials, and women who faced gender discrimination in technical fields. Each person brought unique perspectives and experiences that enriched the entire program. 6 months later, downtown auto repair had transformed from a traditional garage into a cutting-edge diagnostic center known throughout the region for solving impossible problems. Michelle's team of unconventionally trained technicians developed innovative solutions that impressed automotive engineers from major manufacturers. The local news covered their success story, but Michelle insisted the focus remain on the broader message about recognizing hidden talent. During the interview, she said something that would be quoted widely. "Excellence isn't about where you went to school or what your job title says. It's about understanding that knowledge and expertise can emerge from the most unexpected places. When we stop making assumptions about people's capabilities based on their appearance or current circumstances, we discover talent that was always there, waiting to be recognized." The story resonated far beyond the automotive industry. Business schools began using Michelle's experience as a case study in organizational blind spots. Human resources departments started questioning their assumptions about candidate evaluation. And most importantly, countless individuals who felt overlooked in their own careers found inspiration in Michelle's journey from invisible to indispensable. Marcus, watching his sister's transformation from his apartment across town, called her one evening with tears in his voice. "You know what makes me proudest?" he said. "It's not just that you got recognition for your expertise. It's that you used that recognition to lift other people up. You turned your experience of being overlooked into a way to make sure others don't have to face that same invisibility." Michelle's response captured the essence of her transformation. "I learned that being underestimated isn't just about one person's struggle. It's about a system that wastes incredible talent because it can't see past its own assumptions. Now, I get to spend every day proving that expertise doesn't have a uniform and brilliance doesn't have a pedigree." 2 years later, Michelle Washington stands in a completely transformed downtown auto repair. But she still arrives each morning with the same quiet dignity that characterized her years of invisibility. The difference is that now, that dignity is recognized and celebrated. The garage has become a regional training center for advanced automotive diagnostics, with Michelle leading teams that solve problems other shops can't handle. Her mentorship program has graduated 47 technicians who now work throughout the automotive industry, each carrying forward the lesson that talent exists everywhere if we're willing to see it. Sophia, the young woman who first approached Michelle for guidance, now runs the Hybrid Systems Training Division and has been accepted to engineering school with a full scholarship. She often tells new students about the day she met a woman who proved that your current job doesn't define your capabilities. Marcus visits the garage regularly, his pride in his sister evident to everyone who meets them. The sacrifice Michelle made for his recovery ultimately led to a deeper understanding of resilience and the hidden strength that exists in every community. But perhaps the most powerful change is in Michelle herself. She no longer moves through the world as if apologizing for her presence. Her expertise is no longer hidden behind assumptions about who belongs in technical spaces. She's become living proof that brilliance doesn't announce itself with credentials. It reveals itself through quiet competence, patient observation, and the courage to speak up when knowledge can make a difference. The lesson of Michelle's story extends far beyond automotive repair. In every workplace, every community, and every social gathering, there are people whose true capabilities remain invisible because we've learned to see only what we expect to see. The janitor might be a brilliant strategist, the receptionist might be a gifted analyst, and the quiet person in the corner might have the solution to problems that have stumped experts for weeks. Michelle's transformation reminds us that respect should never be conditional on job titles, that wisdom often wears work clothes, and that the most dangerous mistake we can make is assuming we know someone's story based on their current circumstances. Every morning, as she walks through the garage that once rendered her invisible, Michelle carries with her the knowledge that changed everything. Sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one everybody underestimates. And sometimes all it takes is one moment of courage to transform not just your own life, but the lives of everyone around you who needed someone to prove that being overlooked doesn't mean being without value.